The sound editing options that we find within PTE-AV-Studio Professional version is one of this software's very best features. And when we talk about sound editing, we're referring to music, commentary, and sound effects. We're able to edit sound for our audio-visual using tracks, and we can create as many tracks as we need. We can place more than one sound file within a track, and those sound files will play one after the other. Alternatively, we can place each sound file within separate tracks, which is what we're likely to need for commentary and sound effects when we mix that with music, because they're all going to need to be played together. Let's take a look, because it's much easier to demonstrate this rather than explain it. What I've done here is to reduce the slide list so that you can see all of the images that I've selected for this particular demonstration. To reduce the size of this area down at the bottom, just place your cursor over the line between the file list above and the slide list, and we can click and drag to make it larger or smaller. If you look above into the file list, you can see 5 sound files. I've got a piece of commentary, I've got some sound effects, and I've got 3 music samples. The first 2 are quite short because it's going to make it a little easier, I think, to demonstrate with, and this one is much longer. We're also going to be switching, especially at the start of this video, from the timeline, and the button for that is down at the extreme bottom right corner of the screen, and also the Project Options Audio tab. Now, rather than going down to the bottom right corner every time we want to go into the timeline, a great shortcut for this is the F6 key. When we touch that key, we jump straight into the timeline, and when we touch the key again, we're back into the slide list. Very convenient. So let's make a start in the timeline with a touch of the F6. Let's make a start by selecting Music 1, and I'm going to drag it down into the timeline. You can see the cursor there, and I can drop this music anywhere. It's not vitally important where I drop it, because I can click and drag and move it into any location. It stands to reason in this scenario that I may want my music starting when the first image starts to appear, so moving it a little bit to the right would seem to be appropriate here. That orange line, by the way, is the volume line, and we'll come back to that in a moment or two. If I went back to my file list here and picked up the second piece of music, it wouldn't be uncommon to want to do this. I've just got a few images for demo purposes, and that's why I've made these 2 pieces of music quite short. But generally speaking, it's quite normal for us to need more than one piece of music. So let me pick up the second and drag that down and place it alongside the first. And now I'd like to take you into the project options and the audio tab. That's down at the bottom left, project options, and there's the audio tab. Now, the reason I've opened up the audio tab here is just to indicate that when we drag the music files down into the timeline, you can see that PTE-AV-Studio placed both pieces of music within track 1. Track 1 was created automatically for us. And we know, because we can see it visually with the waveform, that music 2 will be played when music 1 comes to an end. As I said, not uncommon if we've got a number of images and the music isn't long enough. Now let me cancel that, and I'm going to go down to Music 1, select it and hit the delete key. Now I'm not deleting that from my computer. All I'm doing is removing it from the timeline. We'll still find it in the file list, so if we change our mind and we want to use it later, we're not losing our work. Or we could just simply drag it back into the file list. The reason I've done that is because I want to bring down another piece of music. This one is much longer, and this indicates another common issue we're going to have to address, where the music file, the sound file for the music, is far longer than we need for the images in our show. So how do we deal with that? Very quick and very easy in PTE-AV-Studio. Scroll to the end, move your cursor over the end of the WAV file, pick it up and drag it back. Line it up with where you want the music to end, and I'm going to line it up with the fade out of my blank at the end, but of course it wouldn't sound very nice at the moment because it needs to be faded out. The fading out of this piece of music is done using audio key points. I'm going to choose somewhere around about 15 seconds before the end, move my cursor over the volume line and click, and there's the first of the audio key points. I can now go to the end of the WAV file and I can simply drag that down. Let's have a little blast of that. I'll put my cursor in this position and I'm going to press play, and we can just hear and watch the fade out of the last slide. And of course it goes without saying that we can pick up these audio key points, and if we want a shorter fade out I can drag it to the right. If I want a longer fade out I can drag it to the left. Not only that, in some cases you may find your music is a higher volume maybe in one area than another, just the nature of the music. Well, you can always add another audio key point or another, so you could actually produce almost a curve. You'll find you'll need to do this from time to time, but let your eyes and ears determine exactly when and how. But it's pretty simple to do. Now, what we've just done with the end of this music file, to trim off quite a number of seconds or even minutes from the end and fade it out, we could choose to leave the end of the music in its natural form and do exactly what we've done here, but use the start of the music. So we could trim back the start to an appropriate point, and then we could fade the music in. Now, as you can see by the spinning round of the screen, I've removed that music file. What I'd like to do next is to take a look at how PTE-AV-Studio allows us to work in a number of different tracks. So for this demonstration I'm going to select Music 1 and I'll just put it into position. But I'm also going to drag down some commentary. I'll just drag it down into any location for the moment. Now you can see that I've dragged that down and I haven't placed it at the end of the music. I've dragged it down into track 2. How do I know it's track 2? Well, although they're not labelled in the timeline, the top one is track 1, which contains the music, and this one, which contains the commentary, is track 2. If we take a quick look into the project options and we look at the audio tab, there we can see exactly what we have. The music is sitting within track 1 and the commentary is sitting within track 2, and of course the advantage of that is we can play both of those sound files together, which is what we're going to want to do when we're dealing with commentary and also sound effects. Now, whenever we introduce commentary or sound effects, we're almost always going to need to edit the music so either the spoken word or the sound effects can be heard correctly. So let me cancel the project options for a moment, and we'll just put the cursor at the start of my commentary, and I'm just going to play this section. In most cases, depending on the music being used, the volume of the music will need to be strategically reduced. I think that's more than enough to demonstrate that we're going to need to strategically reduce the volume of the music track so the spoken word can be heard. Now the way we do that is using audio key points, and for a little bit of commentary such as this, we're going to need at least 4. Now remember, placing these audio key points is pretty easy. We just click, and I can click into any location, and don't worry about where you're placing these for the moment, because I can always pick them up and slide them to wherever I want them. Now generally speaking, and when I say generally, there's always going to be the odd exception, but generally speaking, we're going to need the music track reduced in volume over that strategic area. They're all going to be different edits because it's going to depend on the nature of your music, the volume of your commentary, but generally don't fade the music down too abruptly. It just sounds unprofessional. If the fade is a bit abrupt here, then all I've got to do is to move this little blue dot a little bit to the left. But I could also add another one in the middle if I felt there was a need. Most of the time there's not. So I'm going to put my cursor back at this position, and the only way we're going to know if we've got this correct is by watching and listening. In most cases, depending on the music being used, the volume of the music will need to be strategically reduced to allow that commentary to be heard. Now it's a little bit difficult from a technical point of view for me to get this absolutely spot on accurate while I'm recording a screen capture video. But what I have found over quite a long time using this software and sound editing is, again, generally speaking, as we fade down, I generally allowed my fade to drift into beyond where the spoken word begins. It just seems to sound a little more natural, and maybe I'd bring that one back a little bit too. So I'd have a much more natural fade down, and sometimes we get that a little bit too long. So even if I brought these a little bit forward, you can see that as the volume comes down to its lowest level, which is 24% by the pop-up there, you can see that already we're well within the spoken word. I won't go through another test, but I know that's going to sound more or less correct, and the only adjustment I may need is to just drop the volume here a little more. Now sometimes when we're working in these confined spaces, we may need a little more depth in the sound file to make those minute adjustments. Now we can do that, and if you're a user of a mouse with a scroll wheel, I think you can do it using the scroll wheel. But because I'm using a Wacom graphics tablet here, I'm using a pen. I need to go to my settings at the top of the screen, Preferences, and I need to go to the timeline. And what I need to adjust here is the audio track height. Just for the moment, I'll put it up to its maximum, which is 400%. I do need to adjust my screen, of course. Let me just get my cursor in the right place. So you can see here that if I wanted to make minute adjustments to the volume, with the screen this size, or with the WAV file expanded to be much wider, it's far easier to do. But of course, once I've completed that and I've run a couple of tests, I'd need to go back to my settings and preferences and drop it back to 100, or just over type the value and take it back to where I started and adjust my screen. So it's something we're not going to need to do all of the time, but it's nice to know that availability is there for when we do. With the change of the screen, you can see that we can adopt exactly the same techniques when we want to introduce a sound effect. Although there are times when the need to fade the music isn't quite so acute with a sound effect as it normally is with the spoken word. As always, the nature of the music and the sound effect will determine the volume of each, and we need to make those judgments by watching and listening. As you can see here, I have two images of surf on a beach, and that would work quite well with an appropriate sound effect. Now you can see that I only need the sound effect to span the start and end of these two images, but we normally require the sound effect to start the fade well before that first seashore image and continue well after. You may notice that I've lined up one of the peaks of the wave sound, which is actually the sound of crashing water, and I've lined that up with the introduction on screen of the second image. Now you're going to find this approach to sound effects works very well from a visual and audio point of view. The fading in and out of sound effects too quickly just doesn't sound quite right. To get the balance right, we may have to reduce the volume of both the music and the sound effects. But using audio key points, that's pretty quick and easy to do, as you've seen. Now, if you need to link a sound effect or even a piece of commentary to a certain image, we can do that by first selecting the image thumbnail, then right-clicking the appropriate sound wave file, and we can link the two. With the spinning round of the screen, I've taken us back to what we looked at a little while ago. I've dragged down from the file list music sample 1 and 2, and I've dropped them both into track 1. So music 1 will play first and music 2 will play second. But if we were intending to increase the music length, either by playing the same piece of music twice or using two different pieces of music, how do we join the two? One of the ways I found I can do that is to just leave a strategic silence between the two tracks. Now that's not quite as silly as it first sounds, because as long as we've got something strong happening on screen, you'll find your viewers hardly notice that one piece of music has ended and another one is just beginning. And as you can see here, right on the gap between these two pieces of music, one fades out, one fades in, I've got quite a strong, colourful image to fill that space. And of course, if a small gap between the two music tracks is not acceptable to you, you can also bridge it by using a sound effect, as you can see here, or in fact we could use commentary too. So we have a number of different techniques we can use to join two pieces of music, but here's another. PTE-AV-Studio gives us the opportunity to do something called crossfade. If I just select my second piece of music, as I drag it to the left, it's blended with the first. Now where we position this is going to be a little bit of trial and error. I'm going to drag it way back just to start with, and the only way we'll know if this is going to work is by putting the cursor up just before that crossfade, pressing play and listening to what we've done. Now, taking into account here that both of those pieces of music were selected at random for this particular demonstration, when we also take into account that the makeup of the two pieces of music is quite a lot different, we can see that with the WAV file of the one on the right and the one on the left, music 1 and 2. And also, given that I just dragged and dropped that one time, I think we got a pretty good result. But if we wanted to adjust things, of course, we've got the ability to move these tracks around, to maybe adjust the volume a little bit of one or the other, and you'll find you'll get a very good crossfade between most pieces of music. Whenever we right click on a sound file, whether that's music, commentary or sound effects, a number of options open up. Now, we've already looked at linking sound to a particular image, but of course it could also be video we're linking to. Most of these options are self-explanatory, I think, but locking tracks does prevent them from being moved along the timeline. Now, that's going to be a good option after we've taken quite a bit of time to create our soundtrack. It'll prevent us from moving it accidentally. Moving sound files up and down just changes which track they're in. As you can see, we can clear all audio key points from here, but a valuable option is to be able to split audio clips. Now let's take a look at a couple of practical uses for this option. Now, we've all heard the saying, the best laid plans can often go wrong. Well, it's not uncommon to record a couple of sentences of commentary, but when we come to put that commentary into our slideshow, we find that between those two sentences we just need 3, 4, 5 more seconds of silence. Well, that's when we can use the option here to split the audio. Now, what I've done with my music track here is to just mute it using that right click option, and way up to the right you can see a little loudspeaker with the no entry sign. So when I put my cursor here, we'll just listen to the bit of commentary that I have. Recording short takes allows me flexibility in where I place that section of commentary in relation to other commentary recordings, my images and also background music. Short takes will also help you with fluffed lines too. So that's the sort of thing I'm referring to. So just about there I could sometimes do with splitting the commentary into two sections or more if it's necessary. Well, we need to put our cursor in the position we want to cut, go down to the WAV file, right click and choose split the audio clip, and it's as simple as that. Now I've got a few seconds space enabling me to put together my images or my video a little bit better. In an earlier part of the video I demonstrated how when we've got to do some fine editing to the sound of our music, commentary or sound effects, we can make the WAV files much wider by going up to our settings. Well, we can also make them longer or shorter. Now the way we do that is if you hold the control key and we touch the F11 key, I'm just tapping the key and you can see the whole bottom section of the screen, the timeline, is stretched. And if we hold the same control key and hit the F12, we can bring our timeline back. Throughout this video I've been talking about sound editing being applicable to music, sound effects and commentary. But what we're looking at on screen at the moment is a video clip. Well, the techniques for editing the sound of a video are much the same as what we've dealt with here. But what we may want to do is to select the video clip from the timeline, right click and choose separate audio from video. because once we've done that, now we've got the opportunity to use exactly the same techniques that we've demonstrated with mostly still images. It's exactly the same. There is one other idea I wanted to mention in relation to splitting the audio file, and I almost forgot it. When we need to trim back music length to match the number of images we're using, we talked earlier about cutting back the end of the music and fading that out so it sounds correct, but that we could also choose to cut back the start of the music and fade it in if the end of the music track was important to the project we were creating. Well, if we split the audio and use crossfade, perhaps we can have our cake and eat it too. We can have both the start of the music and also the end, and quite often they are important. What you're looking at here is the same images we've been viewing throughout this video, and I've dragged down a piece of music. I've lined up the start, and if I scroll to the end, you can see that it's a little bit too long. So what I'm going to do here is just look at the WAV file, and I'm just looking for something which is similar. If we look at the WAV file there, it does look fairly similar to what we can see here. So if I put my cursor in this position and I right click the WAV file and choose split audio clip, we know we can click and drag and leave a gap. But what I need to do, I'm going to drag this to the right, just temporarily, because I need to line up the end. And to do that, I want a bit of space. So I'm just going to drag that a little bit more to the right, drag it to the left. So what we're looking at here is the music fading out or ending nicely with the last slide in our sequence, which means we've got this area to fill. So what I'm going to do is just drag this back and allow a very short crossfade. Now you already know how the crossfade works, so I'm not going to do a series of visual and audio tests here, because we would need to do that to make sure it sounded and looked okay. But if it didn't, we've got the opportunity, of course, of maybe dragging the track on the right to the right and reducing the left part. We could then extend this a little further in. We can increase the crossfade or decrease it. And perhaps this is one of those times when maybe we want to also use that option we have to touch the Control key and F11. And sometimes that's going to help you when you can see both of the WAV files. But basically this is a little bit of a trial and error, but I did it before I started to record this section, and I got a near perfect result without too much difficulty at all. If you've been watching this video on YouTube, can I encourage you to subscribe to my channel? And if you hit that notification bell, you'll be informed whenever I put up new content. I'll see you next time.